For me, where do my eyes go exactly? A lot of it depends on the play call, because I know that we've got guys looking at everything. So there might be one specific thing based on the play we've got called that I'm looking at, or sometimes I'm maybe thinking 2 or 3 plays ahead. So I might say, hey, what are we getting here? It might be more broad and more general.
We're back for week 2 of Accelerate Everything with our host, Dub Maddox. Dub, it was a great week 1 there with Brian Vaughn. Certainly learned a lot there talking defense. This week we flip it over to the other side of the ball with University of Alabama-Birmingham's offensive coordinator, Alex Mortensen. Tell us a little bit about Alex.
Well, Alex is a star on the rise. He was, on the Alabama staff for 8 seasons and under just some phenomenal coaches there and learned a ton. And now he's at UAB and just doing some great things. And I tell you, I learned a lot in this one, and he's a guy that you want to keep your eye on because he's going to do big things.
And Dub will be back with his takeaways from this one following the interview. Here's the interview with Alex Mortensen, offensive coordinator, University of Alabama-Birmingham.
Today's guest is Alex Mortensen. Alex is currently the offensive coordinator at University of Alabama at Birmingham. Prior to that, Alex was known as the man behind the curtain on the offensive side for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alex coached for Nick Saban for 8 seasons, getting to serve under 5 different offensive coordinators during his tenure. Alex, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Dub, thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. Appreciate it.
Alex, I think we first met at a quarterback camp. I think it was 2012 when you were the passing game coordinator at New Mexico Highlands. And I was lucky enough to get to hang out with you at that camp. And I still remember talking about quarterback mechanics. It's exciting to watch your career path accelerate over the last decade, and I'm glad we get to connect on this pod.
Yeah, me too. I'd heard about you. I kind of knew who you were for a while and ended up at your camp. I think it was in Colorado, drove up there and was just really, really impressed with the camp and really impressed with your ability to teach, and really had a lot of respect for just the way you presented the information. And the thing that, one, I learned some things there, and 2, was just impressed that all these kids pretty well were doing what you told them to do. So I just, even from a teaching progression standpoint, it was a really good experience for me.
Well, I still remember the thing that stuck out to me about you was just how inquisitive you are, the questions you ask. You ask great questions, and you're a learner. And I think there's no secret in why you've went on to do great things, and you're still at the peak of your career, and you're going to go real far. But hats off to you for just being who you are and being open and to ask questions. And I learned some stuff from you that day as well. I want to start the pod and I got to ask the most obvious question. In the Mount Rushmore of football coaches, you have worked under one of them in Coach Saban. Was Coach involved on the offensive side during a typical game week in relation to the game plan and install offensively? And what were some of the constants maybe that he would stress throughout the week during practice for the offense?
Yeah, no, I think that is a great question. And your question is specific to the game week, but I think to answer it, I would have to back up a little bit and say that one of his principles would kind of give you an idea. When I got there, Lane Kiffin, had come in to become the offensive coordinator, and part of Coach Saban's deal was to really keep the verbiage and the system in place. Now, I think every coordinator, he hired them for a reason. He wanted their input, their flavor, their personality, their ideas. So each coordinator brought new things to the system, but a lot of the terminology or the core tenets of it did stay the same. And I think his thought was he wanted, one, I do think he had beliefs. He had some philosophical things he wanted. And I think that adapted and evolved over time. Obviously, he could answer that question better than I could, but I saw him, seek to adapt and learn over time and change and stay ahead of things, or at least keep up. So from the beginning, just in terms of go back to February, he's already going to have some thoughts on the direction he wants the offense to go. I think it started there. And then I think he wanted, his feeling is as these coordinators come in, it's easier for one guy to learn the system than for a new guy to come in and ask everyone to learn his language, his system. So, which is an interesting philosophy. And I think try to create continuity for guys that are in the program for 4 or 5 years as a player. So I think his influence really started there. And then to get more specific, as you get into a game week, you'd put the last game to bed on Sunday. And, he might always have some comments coming out of that game, albeit a lot of it related to personnel. Have you thought about this guy here? Have you thought about using this tackle as an extra tight end? Things of that nature. And then as we got into the game planning, he would come in every Tuesday morning with the offense. So he really did coach. He spent a lot of time with the defense, but he would come in Tuesday morning. And I should back up and say, too, some years the starting quarterback would spend some time with him Sunday night reviewing the previous game. I know that's not really exactly specific to your question in regards to the game plan, but I do think that's an interesting little nugget or detail, and where he might have 4 or 5 things from the game he wanted to review with him. But otherwise, I think he grinded pretty hard on defense. He's involved in the game plan and putting their plan together there and scouting the opponent, all those things. And so Tuesday morning, he'd come in, and at that point, most of the game plan, he might come in at 9:30, might be 10 o'clock. We were an afternoon practice team, might come in at 10:15. There wasn't a hard exact time. And at that point, he would come in with some input. And what he had usually done is he'd usually just watch at least 2 games of the opponent, watch their defense. This is kind of when he transitions, watch their defense. So he would have some comments on what he saw. Some of it would be scheme related, some of it would be personnel related. And, I think it was really always fascinating to hear the things he had to say, because he knew the game so well and knew it from both sides of the ball. But he could come in and tell you, hey, if you get this formation, this is an issue for their primary call. If you get an unbalanced, I think they have issues here. I think they're soft here. So there'd be some really good nuggets like that. And then the other thing he would provide there too is, now he's also still on the tail of watching the opponent's offense, because he's been game planning them for a day and a half or whatever it amounts to. And he'd say, hey, look, here's 2 or 3 things they do that are really tough on us. And it wasn't him telling you hey, you got to go put this in today, but he's just giving you some information to maybe you file away and do it down the road. Maybe it's a week, maybe it's 2 weeks. And he'd tell you, and he'd give you the why. This is why it's hard. And so I do feel like those conversations, one, were really helpful for the offense. But I also think it raises the football IQ of your whole building, because you're getting this information from a guy that's a great coach. So at that point, when he would get done with that, then the coordinator would present what we were doing on offense and what our plan was for normal downs in that game. And we also did short yardage and goal line on that Tuesday practice as well. So we would go through all that, and sometimes he wouldn't have anything to say. Sometimes he'd like the thought process. Sometimes he might question or push back. So you could get different feedback from him. And then as the week went on, I think what was interesting is he would watch the offensive practice film from that point forward. And he would watch it with us. And a lot of times, we'd watch it pretty fast, but he would still watch it. And as you're watching the film, he's still going to have some feedback. Hey, this is really tough. I like what you're doing here. Their quarters box adjustment in a bunch is going to struggle with this. Or it might be, hey, have you thought about this? This would be better. And then sometimes it might be I don't like what you're doing here. This is not, sound or whatever. And then sometimes it would just be as simple as posing a question. Is this guy right? Was this guy wrong in terms of, what an offensive player is doing? His feedback through the week could take on a lot of forms. So while he wasn't in there, because he's a defensive coach and heavily involved in the game plan, he wasn't in there forming the game plan with us as we're going through tape and all that. He still kind of had his fingers on it all through the week, because he's watching every bit of the film.
So for those that are not aware, can you list the names of the offensive coordinators that you have worked with while you were at Bama, and give us some things that you learned from each of those guys that maybe have shaped your approach as a coordinator?
Yeah, one, I would say this. I was very fortunate to be at Alabama with Coach Saban, and really grateful to have that job. And it was really fortunate to work with all these guys. And I would also say, too, before I even name these names, there are a lot of people in that building that were really good coaches that aren't household names. And I learned from a lot of those guys. Some of them were position coaches. We had a pretty large staff. There were really good young coaches. They were analysts. So really grateful to have had that opportunity. Now, in regards to the coordinators, I was there with Lane Kiffin, Brian Daboll, Michael Locksley, Steve Sarkisian, and Bill O'Brien. So I was there with all those guys and learned from all of them. And it's funny. It's I feel like I learned then, but even as I reflect back, I feel like I'm still learning from them. I don't know if that makes sense. You go, okay, I have a better appreciation for what they did, why they did this. And I think the thing that was interesting is they were all different. And then you had to watch them all adapt, because our players were different every year. Everyone goes through that. And, I know we had good players at Alabama, but you think about the quarterbacks. Okay, Blake Sims, Jake Coker, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones, Bryce Young. Those guys are great players, all different though. And so it was fascinating to see all these guys adapt to the and that's just the quarterback position. That's not even the offensive line, the receivers, so on and so forth. But, Coach Kiffin came in and, obviously he's a great coach. He's a great offensive coach. And one of the things I learned from him is I think he always did a really good job of getting his best players at the point of attack, at the tip of the spear, and did a good job if he needed to move them around to get them the ball. I think that can get lost sometimes sometimes you do get focused on just playing with pace and tempo, and which I think is great. And I'm all about manipulating the tempo of the game and all that. I think it can create a really good advantage. But I thought Coach Kiffin never lost sight of, okay, we've got Amari Cooper. He's a great player, but let's not let a team limit his touches. Let's find ways to get him the ball. And then, there's a year, okay, hey, you've got Derrick Henry. Let's be a little more run play action. So I think he did a good job of adapting. I also think Coach Kiffin was very creative. And then I think he got there at a very interesting time too, because, and this is the first year I got there as well, it was his first year. Alabama had been good on offense. And I think sometimes people just have this perception that it had only been great defense, but they've been good. They've been very sound on offense. They've done a good job. But there was kind of this idea now, you got a new coordinator coming in with Kiffin, and then Kiffin was coming from USC. Coach Kiffin was, and he'd been the head coach there. And of course, prior, he had a couple other head coaching stints. And then early when he was young in his career, he'd been at USC under Pete Carroll. And remember, they had some great offenses there. You remember some of those players, Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush, but they were pro style. They got in a huddle. They read off a wristband, multiple formations, shifts, moved people around, 21, 12, variety of personnel groupings. And so you had his background there. Alabama had been a little pro-style-ish. Now, I think what I didn't know until I got there is they had a pretty good system to play fast and play no huddle and play in 11 and play spread out. Coach Saban had kind of been pushing that. But you had the Alabama system. So you've got that being represented. You've got Kiffin. And then here comes Nick Saban, who's going, okay, look, I want to play more than 11 personnel. I want to play with the Y off the ball. I want to move them around, and I want to play with tempo. And so you kind of had these three ideas having to kind of come together. And so I think Coach Kiffin did a really good job of figuring out how to navigate that and navigate Coach Saban's vision. I think we now see the way Coach Kiffin plays now, which is spread out, fast, tempo. And a lot of times we forget at that point that was not his background. And so he did a really good job. I think the other thing too is just seeing, I don't know if humility is the word, whatever it is, but like he did the research. He talked to other people. We got on the phone, brought people in, visited people to just get better ideas as to, how to communicate, how to adapt the offense going forward. And he'd seen it firsthand when he was at USC. He'd seen Chip Kelly play fast. So he'd seen it and had respect for the idea, but now had to figure out the how on some of it. And I think also the how for him was, and I can't speak for him now, but at that point, I don't think he wanted to lose his multiplicity as he did it. And so that was interesting. And then Brian Daboll came in, and Daboll now inherits this offense. Brian Daboll had been at the New England Patriots for a lot of his career. I think at that point he had 2 stints, but then he'd also been on his own as a coordinator, I think 4 different places at that time, and then had been an assistant coach, I think, at the Jets, maybe been a Brian Schottenheimer. So he had a pretty wide variety of experiences in the NFL. And I believe the last time he'd been in college was as a GA at Michigan State for Coach Saban, working on defense. And then when he went to the Patriots, he worked on defense. So the thing for me with Coach Daboll, look, it's hard to summarize the magnitude of how good these guys are in a few sentences. So I feel like I'm doing none of them justice. But with him, the one thing I really gained an appreciation for was how well he knew the other side of the ball, particularly coverage. He knew coverage very, very well and had a good way of scouting the opponent and having a checklist of things to look for. How do they adjust things? If they're in a post-safety zone, how do they adjust to this motion? How do they adjust to that motion? Okay, if it's a post-safety man, okay, does it differ if it's a 4 or 5-man rush? Things that can maybe give you some clues and indicators for a quarterback as to what you're getting, or even secondly, are the things we want to do as we attack. And so I think he was really good that way. And then he also, I think that was a time period we saw our drop back passing game really get enhanced. And I think part of that is the personnel. I think he's adapting the personnel. We had a really good crew of young receivers at that point, and our quarterback play was kind of moving that direction. But the drop back passing game went well. And I think part of it too was there was some simplicity in teaching in terms of how the quarterback was taught to read things, which I think there's some wisdom in that. One of the great challenges and goals for us as coaches can you make the complex simple? So I got a million other things I could talk about with Coach Dave. With him coming from the Patriots, you hear those guys talk about sometimes, and it sounds like you're stating the obvious, but I think there's some wisdom there, which is before you win, you've got to keep from losing. And you'd have to fact check me on this, but I think our penalties were way down that year. I think just even some of those cultural things, discipline, some of those things he really emphasized, pre-snap operation being clean, I think that stuff showed up. Michael Locksley. So interesting background. So he'd been in Alabama for 2 years already. 1 year as an analyst with Kiffin, 1 year as a receiver coach under Daboll. But then you go back in his background, he's been a head coach. But, his offensive background, a lot of it came under Ralph Friedgen. And who obviously, Ralph Friedgen's got an unbelievable track record as an offensive coach, going back to Georgia Tech, Maryland. And sometimes I think people forget, too, I think he was the coordinator for the Chargers when they went to the Super Bowl in '94 with Stan Humphries. So Locksley had other experiences, too. I don't want to limit him. But what I saw that year was our RPO game took off. So, Locksley, there were some threads of things we did with Coach Kiffin. There were a lot of the things that Daboll put in with the drop back game. I would say some of it started to come alive now because it was second year in it. You had all these young receivers that were a year older. Jalen was getting better. Tua was the starter now. So I think the drop back game kind of exploded and the RPO game really exploded. And if I remember correctly, we ran over 220 RPOs that year, true post-snap decisions. I'm not even talking about perimeter screens and things of that nature. And we were very good at them. Those plays were very explosive. I think one of the things after studying it, they were even in some of the, against the tougher teams, those plays probably became a little bit less explosive, but they remained very efficient for us in most games. And so that was kind of the thing there. And I think he did a really good job of teaching those things, helping the quarterback know how to frame it, how to look at it. What are your pressure answers, different types of pressure? I think making sure everyone saw the plays through the same lens, knowing the problems of those plays. So I thought he did a great job there. And then in amongst other areas too, then Steve Sarkisian came in after Locksley. And so Sark, you may remember right prior to that had been at the Atlanta Falcons for 2 years. Okay, when he went to Atlanta, who did he follow? Kyle Shanahan. First of all, let's say this. Sark was already a great offensive coach before he ever goes to Atlanta. So let's not take it, I don't want to please don't misinterpret me there. But I think that there were things in that Atlanta experience with Shanahan where he was able to bring some of that to us. And then what's interesting about Sark had been an analyst in 2016 with Coach Kiffin when he was there. And then the coordinator prior to Coach Kiffin was Doug Nussmeier. Well, where did Nuss come from? Washington, who was the head coach of Washington. Sark. So Sark, coming in, I think the transition was relatively easy for him. So there were a lot of, he kind of in a weird way had his fingerprints on parts of the system already, some directly, some indirectly. And then he's able to, I think, did a really good job of tying all of it together. And at that point, kind of you're seeing all these things through the years, maybe some things kind of die off. And then I think he did a good job, some of the best concepts through all those years stay. It was almost like the best things got selected for. And then he's able to bring in the stuff, from Atlanta. And I thought that year where we transitioned, if there was a transition in any way, I would say this. I think our formation multiplicity probably kicked up a little bit. Motion multiplicity kicked up. And then I would say that the play action game picked up. So notice the comment I made earlier about the RPOs. Sometimes against some of the tougher teams, efficient, but maybe not as explosive as, the plays are a little bit more bang, bang. And so to try to manufacture explosives, I think he did a really good job of bringing the play action game back to life. Don't get me wrong. We still ran RPOs. They were still explosive. They were still good for us. But I think if you were to look at the distribution of play calls, play action kicked up a bit, and it was really effective for us. And then I think Sark has always done a great job of plays off plays in terms of tying his presentations together. Maybe the whole game plan isn't put together that way, but there's at least pieces of it where there's at least a play off of a play or 2 or 3 plays off of a play out of the same presentation. And then I also think he had a good mix of let's do something to indicate the coverage or defense and get to the best play. We didn't play the whole game that way. I know some people do, but I think he had a good mix of both. And then Bill O'Brien, and again, there's a lot I'm leaving out, but Bill O'Brien came in, and Billy O is a great coach that, again, this is a guy that had a great background prior to that. He'd been the head coach of the Houston Texans. I think people forget, in his first 6 years there, they won the conference, the division 4 times, 3 of which without Deshaun Watson. So I think that's something that people, when they reflect back, hopefully people have a greater appreciation for that. He also, like Locksley, had a history under Ralph Friedgen when he was young. He was at Georgia Tech, and I believe maybe at Maryland for a year at some point. But then I kind of like to say he almost felt like, I don't want to speak for him, but he almost had to kind of go through this rebirth in coaching. He's 36 or 37 years old, and he goes to New England as I think the first year, maybe even quality control. He's 36, 37 years old, and then ends up 3 years later becomes a coordinator after Josh McDaniels leaves. And they had a great offense there. But Billy was interesting because when he went back and was a quality control coach, he broke down tape, he padded games, he drew cards. He went back to the nitty-gritty, the details, and he learned that system in New England. And then while they were there, okay, they went heavy on tempo, when he became the coordinator. And so they had a pretty expansive tempo package, and they were also very good in empty. I mean, they were very good at a lot of things. Again, I don't want to oversimplify things, but when he got to Alabama, and really, I should say this, all these coordinators, we use tempo. Every one of them had their own flavor on it. Different guys had different philosophies on how to use it. And I would say a lot of that still directed from Coach Saban. I mean, Coach Saban wanted the ability to play fast and change the pace of the game when we wanted to. I thought Coach O'Brien did a great job in several areas, but 2 or 3 I'd like to point out. Empty. I think he does a great job with empty, always has. And then the other thing is we had a great quarterback in Bryce Young at that time. And Bryce was a young player that was really his first full year to start, but was like brilliant. I mean, he was so smart, saw the game very well, understood the game very well. And so one thing Coach O'Brien would do is he would filter a lot of the game plan through him. And I think this comes from his NFL background a little bit too, but it might be late in the week. It might be Thursday's practice or the meeting Thursday. It might be Friday. And he's going to go through the game plan with him, go through the call sheet and say, okay, let's talk about how we see this. What are we looking for? Okay. And if Bryce is uncomfortable, like, can he get comfortable through conversation? Or, hey, we'll throw the play out. We got enough volume. We will throw it out. And then even then, there were some things in game at halftime where, the staff collectively is going to build some ideas. But his last meeting, and he called the game from up top, is he's going to talk to Bryce and say, all right, this is what we're thinking. Are you comfortable with this? Because at the end of the day, the quarterback's got to feel good about it. And I also think there's wisdom there in knowing who his quarterback was, knowing that it was a guy that was capable of input. I think if it had been someone that wasn't capable of input, I don't think he would have coached that way as much. But again, and the last thing I'll say is I think it speaks to all those guys adapting to their players. I mean, even with Sark started off, his starting quarterback was Tua, and then by the end it was Mac Jones. He called the game a little bit different for both of them. We talked about, okay, Tua's better at this, Mac's a little better this way. And so even then, like Mac had the 2019 season, Mac closed the season out. I think he started 4 games. And so with Mac, it looked a little different. And it was subtle, but it was different than it was with Tua. And I think all these guys did a great job adapting to the person. I know I talked a long time. I don't know if I said very much, but that's a little rundown on all those guys.
No, it's fabulous. I mean, we could go on for hours, I think, unpacking all the wisdom that you've gained.
Dub, I was excited this offseason when I saw you came out with The Art of Play Calling and really dives into and take a look at play calling. I think no one else has really done this in the past in putting some educational materials out there. So something highly useful here for coaches.
Yeah, it was, something I've been working on for some time. I really feel like I needed to go deeper and have a better framework for myself as a play caller and just studying guys, what makes a good play caller. And really it starts with the analytics. And so analytics is a really popular trend and everybody's studying those. But I want to wrap my mind around, some of these analytic probabilities and how can I build it into a play calling process to help coaches just make sure they're working the probabilities in their favor. And so we put a 4.5-hour course together, and it has a 60-page workbook that goes along with it, 20 modules. And we just take you through kind of step by step to build a framework of how to package your offense into a system that allows you to play the game out before it's played, and then also making sure you're working the probabilities in your favor. So it's something that a lot of coaches have watched for the last 3-4 months that it's been out, and I got a lot of good feedback from it. And so I think it's something, if you're out there and you're a new play caller, or maybe you're an experienced one, I think there's nuggets in there, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, that you're going to be able to walk away with and use this upcoming season. Yeah, if you could go to our website, r4footballsystem.com, it's there on our website, and then we've got a discount code that we'll share out in the show notes for you guys that are listening if you want to take part of that. And again, look forward to your feedback on that and hope it helps you this season.
I want to ask a question about play calling, and people say play calling is an art form, and just like art, there's different methods that can achieve good results. What are some of the different styles that you have seen as it terms of just the rhythm or the approach or the structure of calling plays that kind of has shaped kind of how you do it now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, some of these guys, being too specific as to who, but they really trusted their preparation. And a lot of the game was called before we ever got to the game. call sheet, they stuck to their openers. They stayed on them. They didn't overreact if things went well, things didn't go well. A lot of times they didn't overreact if we got something different defensively. They trusted the preparation to some extent, and they ordered all their third downs, ordered all the red area, and just, man, they stayed on it as long as they could. Once the openers were expired, then they might start to work in game a little bit. And then other guys, man, they adjusted very quick. They kind of trusted their eyes a little bit and felt like, okay, this corner's a little smaller. I know what he's listed at, but can we get a one-on-one with him? Or if somebody changed a little bit defensively, they had something game plan oriented, they start adapting and maybe come off their plan a little quicker and trust their instincts and their feel for the game. And that certainly was interesting to watch with all of them. But I think we've been a little bit better when we've trusted our plan and be a little bit later to a change in not to say we don't make adaptations or changes, especially if somebody defensively has made wholesale changes. But that's probably where we've been a little better. I think what'll be interesting is in college, we haven't had a tablet. NFL's had pictures. I know high schools had video. We're going to get video for the first time. And so we've had to rely on, the information we're getting upstairs or what we see ourselves. So what I'm wondering is, will we see more people try to adapt in game with better information? I know, I'm assuming you guys have had video, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know how much that's going to change things. But I think the other thing too, just in terms of like the art of calling plays is just, I think you always go into the game with some questions. Like maybe you have an idea, but you get into a game and you figure out you can't control the line of scrimmage and you got to pivot pretty quick. Or maybe it's just one specific reason. There's an end you can't block on third down and you think you should chip or nudge the guy. So I think there's some things that way, or maybe it's the other way. You go, hey, we can push him around. So maybe you had a plan of your distribution of play call being a little bit more quick game, drop back, boot, naked, and now you go, hey, we're going to run it more. It's really simple, but I think that's another thing too, is getting into a game like that or getting into a game and try to make those observations and figure out where you go is something I think all those guys, try to do to some extent.
Alex, great offensive coaches, like you said with Coach Daboll, understand defense as much as they do offense. You've seen some of the best defenses in college football over the years. What are some of the trends that you have seen in the last couple of years that have posed a problem for the offensive side?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, defensive multiplicity can be tough from a preparation standpoint. I feel like there is a little bit more multiplicity in every area: front, coverage, pressure. And I feel like if you were to chart defensive line movement, I don't know if I'm right in this. It just feels like it's up. It feels like it's happening more, whether that's games, slanting, stunts, or whether it's tied to a pressure. And now on the flip side, maybe from a preparation standpoint, it can make things feel a little harder offensively. But I don't know that it always results in playing better defense. I think that sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it can be hard to get ready for those things. I think one of the things that's in vogue right now a little bit is the three safety stuff. And I know that's been around for a while. I just think it's gaining in popularity. Some kind of 3-down structure, 3 safety defense, and in a lot of different ways to try to create those run fits, whether it's trapping your corners or, cloud support, sky support, and then getting the middle safety as a runner and figuring out ways to block him. I don't know that is all, I've got respect for the idea. Some teams have played it really well. Some teams have struggled with it defensively. But I definitely think that's a trend. There's still kind of that rocky, Zach Arnett's not at Mississippi State anymore, but you had that Rocky Long tree that felt like it was starting to branch out a little bit. That's different. Almost like a cousin of the Joe Lee Dunn stuff where, the multiplicity up front, it's very hard to get ready for. And I don't know if statistically I can back this up, but it feels like some of your games against those teams can be a little bit big, little. You get hit for -1, 0, 1, 2, and then you hope you pop one for 40 or 60 or whatever. But if you don't have the explosives, man, they can be long days at the ballpark. So those two things I think have picked up a little bit, that Rocky Longish deal, the 3 safety stuff. And I think the 3 safety stuff, I'm not a defensive coach, but I feel like it's probably a little bit adaptation to people playing more spread out. In general, I think it's probably a little bit of an adaptation to some of the wide split stuff you've seen get really popular. I'm talking about receiver splits, not offensive line splits. And it can be a way to try to play the RPOs too, where maybe you can kind of tie things up B gap to B gap, force the runs to roll off the table to guys that you've got forcing those runs from outside in. So, but there's obviously, who knows what'll be next. There's other things I'm sure that are coming, but those are the things I've seen a lot recently.
Now let's go to your experience with actually calling plays. Are you in the box or are you on the sideline?
I've been on the sideline.
Okay. And talk me through of where your eyes are going, like during the game, what you're looking at, maybe what the communication protocol that you have in play is when you're calling plays from the sideline.
Yeah. From a position standpoint, I try to stand behind the defense. I think for me, I feel like that I have the best vantage point there. That's something I will probably continue to experiment with. But even then, and I do feel like I see it well back there, and you hope that you can trust, the eyes you've got in the box. And we've got different people assigned to different things. I think that's really important, is to try to have some kind of division of labor there, whether you've got people looking at the back end, the front. I think both sides of the field, I think, are important because you want to be able to get questions answered quickly and accurately. I think with the tablet stuff now, maybe that's not as important. But if you need information mid-drive or maybe there's a clock stoppage or a timeout, I imagine your eyes from the top of the sideline are going to continue to be important. So I still, even though I feel like I can see it pretty well there, put a lot of value on having our staff give input on what they see. And so for me, where do my eyes go exactly? A lot of it depends on the play called because I know that we've got guys looking at everything. So there might be one specific thing based on the play we've got called that I'm looking at, or sometimes I'm maybe thinking 2 or 3 plays ahead. So I might say, hey, what are we getting here? It might be more broad and more general. I know that a lot of guys, I think we talked about this on the phone, want to get in a formation and play these if-then games. And so if we were to play that way, then maybe, there'd be certain things based on the structure we'd be looking for that would maybe get us to another play.
When it comes to practice, are there any good-on-good group drills or organization ideas that you've experienced that may be different than just a standard, scale period, inside run team period that you have seen that you would recommend that we try to emulate?
I think it depends on the phase of the year. The good-on-good stuff in season, I thought Coach Saban did a great job of that. I think that's maybe one of the best things. I mean, he does so many things at a high level or did so many things at a high level and learned so much from them. And I think practice organization was a big one and keeping the good-on-good work in season, I thought was really important. But, whether that was 7-on-7, team run, or a team period, you alluded to, I think, all of those things just now. And then training camp in spring would be the time where there were some other things that we did. And I think Coach Dilfer has done a really good job with this too. Trent Dilfer's our head coach here and got a great football mind as well. And so, whether some of the drills that they may not feel like they're offensive drills, but whether it's half line pass, 1-on-1s, 2-on-2, I think all those drills can be good. And I think if you plan them properly, a lot of people I think feel like they're only good defensive drills, but I think if you plan them properly, I think they can be really good for both sides of the ball. And sometimes even if it is a little bit uphill for the offense, I think the advantage there is now you're challenging your offensive players have to win on technique and to win on execution and timing and precision. And, maybe that can be a good thing sometimes. And because at some point, a lot of games turn into that. It turns into contested throws or, having to run the ball a little bit uphill. So I think like half line pass, 2-on-2, like we would do a 2-on-2 drill, man coverage. Sometimes it'd be blitz 0. Sometimes it would be what we would call 11 funnel or some kind of cover 1 with a post safety. So in a sense, it's 3-on-2 so they can play with the proper leverage. I think those were really good drills. And then mixing in stacks into some of those drills, or if you want to put a third receiver in there, you can mix your bunches stuff in. I think it's a good way to steal reps for running backs in the passing game if you want to just work the X in the back or the Y in the back in a 1x3 set. So I think all those things can be really good from a good-on-good standpoint. But I think the other part, too, is like, what are you doing with the guys in the box? Like, I think half-line run can be a good drill. I think there's really good pass protection drills where it's protections versus pressure, and you might be able to rip off 6 reps with your ones that you're not going to get in a team period. And it's good on good. And I think that teaching can be really, really, really valuable. So I'm in favor of all those things. I think as much good on good work you can get, I think is really good.
Alex, you've given us some great information today. I tell you, you're a star on the rise, and I'm looking forward to watch your career continue to elevate. Thanks for coming on the pod and sharing some of these nuggets with us.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you. And like I told you on the front end, really have a ton of respect for you, and hopefully it was good. And but enjoy talking football and look forward to hopefully talking more in the future.
Dub, you always got to sit down with a pen and pencil when you listen to these because there's so many great ideas. What were your takeaways from this one?
Well, my first takeaway, Keith, was I liked how Alex talked about how Coach Saban would collaborate with the offense in a typical game plan week and give them ideas on some things that the defense opponent would give the defense opponent issues. And, they wouldn't necessarily use some of those things, but he would kind of keep a running file. And I think more staffs will benefit from this type of dialogue. The staffs I've been on, and when I talk to friends that are in the business, a lot of offensive, defensive staffs really don't collaborate as much. And I think there's a lot of things that you can see, some blind spots, maybe strengths and weaknesses that you're not seeing, whether it's yourself or your opponent. And I think this is something that should be practiced. The other thing I liked was just learning what all the great coordinators he's been under do. And some of the things were always keeping your best players at the point of attack, knowing how to move them around, being humble and consistently seeking out knowledge, understanding defense better than you do offense, being able to manipulate the defense with formations and motions to get a specific look and call the best play, and always talking to your quarterback and making sure he feels comfortable about the things you're calling. I think those are some characteristics of things that he learned through the great coordinators he's been under. I think that's things that we can learn from as well. My third one was just kind of defensive trends. I really like, hearing what he talked about, the defensive trends that he's seeing, and defenses are becoming more multiple with front structures and incorporating movements. So you need to be prepared for those as an offense and the schemes you're calling. You're seeing a lot more three safety structures from a coverage standpoint, and those can cause issues in the passing game. And you need to understand how the run fits are effective within those coverages. So I think that's something that coaches need to do a better job of understanding and being prepared for. And then another defensive trend, Keith, I'm hearing a lot of guys in college talk about is this Rocky Long, Joe Lee Duntree, the 3-3-5, and it's basically just organized chaos. And if you don't have a plan for that and you're not prepared, it's going to be, long days to the ballpark is what he says. And so I think that's some things you may want to look at for these upcoming seasons and have a plan for.
Definitely a lot there. Another great episode here on Accelerate Everything. We'll be back for another one next week. Dub, thanks for the time you put into this.
No problem, Keith.
Be sure to visit coachandcoordinator.com and check out the 10% Toolkit, which highlights our partners and some of the offers they have to you as a listener. The link to that is in the show notes. Follow all we're doing at coachandcoordinator.com and follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.